We are back with episode 6 of season 3, Tattooed Tears, the story of Allyson Watterson. You may recall in last week's episode, we had criminal behaviorist and former law enforcement officer Sarah Cailean. She is back with us this week as we continue looking through the charges. And one of the things that we touched on, we heard from the private investigator that there was this occurrence that had happened seemingly with Ben's sister. And Sarah was theorizing that seems to have showed up in these records as well. And that's where we're going to pick up today's story. I think you're right, particularly because of the date that happens with this record. His harassment charge is from Christmas Day, 2018. And there is a conviction there as well. Misdemeanor Class B, convicted for harassment. It looks like he gets 6 months on that.
Okay, so, what that tells me typically, in most states, and I know that it's changing a little bit now, but in most states, that would still be classified as domestic violence because they are related by blood or marriage is usually how that goes. I misspoke then in the last episode. For some reason, I thought that was one of the ones that had been dropped. It sounds like it was not dropped. It may have been that they pled out the domestic violence charge. Usually domestic violence will always automatically have two charges. So it'll be the domestic violence and then either assault or menacing, depending on what it was, right? So if it was a verbal threat, it'll be the menacing or harassment. It being on Christmas Day, this sounds textbook. Honestly, it's terrible to say, but we often responded to a lot of domestic incidents, especially within a family, not necessarily like spouses and couples, but brothers and sisters and parents and stuff like that on major holidays. There's a lot of tension. We all know that. So.
Yeah. And I do think it's important to make that clarification that we're trying to connect the dots with this information. We're hearing something from the PI. Right. It looks to me like this might be the charge that he's talking about there. So I just want to be clear. We're not 100% sure on it, but what we are sure of, there's definitely a harassment charge. It's on Christmas Day. There is a conviction. Here it does mention not eligible for the treatment dorm, commute remainder of sentence upon completion. Can you tell us what that might mean?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with Oregon's drug diversion programs. I would assume that had something to do with the drug diversion program. So it may have been, again, that he was or that somebody was drunk or high at the time that the incident took place. And so they would have, theoretically been eligible for some sort of a diversion substance abuse court instead of typical criminal court. But if they were saying that this case itself either made it ineligible or because on his previous case, it looked like they had given him drug diversion stuff kind of piled in there with it in terms of treatment and everything, that they may have said, you're not eligible for this again. You don't get that again because you broke the rules.
Okay, gotcha. So then we fast forward to really the big cluster of charges, and this is the ones that, he gets arrested in December of 2019. His court date actually happens in April of 2020. And once again, we've got this big long list of stacked charges. Some get dropped. Others, he does actually change and decides to plead guilty. The first one we've got here, misdemeanor Class A, criminal trespass in the first degree. That one's dismissed. We get a felony Class C, unlawful possession of methamphetamine, and that gets dismissed. I just wanted to touch on this for a second because there seems to be a lot of information out there that he's a user of meth. I call it social information when we kind of get that level. But here,
the photographic information is pretty strong too.
Sure.
Once you've been around meth users, it definitely takes on a physical appearance that is standard. Yeah. For longtime users, it's standard almost across the board. You can pick him out in a crowd, and his photos look like somebody who has been escalating in methamphetamine abuse. Yeah,
gotcha. Just to give a little more insight to that for our audience, can you give us a couple of those indicators that you would typically see?
Sure. Obviously, one of them is weight loss, and so significant thinning and stuff. You will see different from, if one of us decided to drop a few pounds and everything, you will see a hollowing out in the mouth. What's happening is that the mouth itself, I don't know medically exactly what's happening. I don't pretend to be a doctor. But essentially what we see is almost like a collapse of the mouth, right? So you will, people who have abused meth for years and years will almost always have significant dental decay or even like total loss of teeth. And because it's like the face just sort of collapses inward. And that to me is the most telling thing. I mean, you can look at that marker in his mugshot and he's just got that, this sort of hollowed out collapsing mouth.
I think the popular term is meth mouth.
Meth mouth. Well, and meth mouth a lot of times applies to just the rotten teeth.
Right.
But to me, the whole sort of like below the nose is kind of meth mouth with the way it's collapsing in.
Yeah. If you do look at his Facebook page and you look at pictures of him from only a few years ago, you can see he had a considerable, he was much heavier, healthy looking.
Healthy looking and a very handsome guy. Yeah.
Definitely. Misdemeanor Class C, theft in the third degree, gets dismissed. Misdemeanor Class A, theft in the second degree, there is a conviction. And I have a little more detail on this one, thanks to some articles we did. This theft charge is apparently related to an incident where he went to a store in Hillsborough. Oh. He spent hours there loading up a shopping cart, and then he walked out without paying. And he stole approximately $700 worth of goods.
He's high. He's high.
That's, can you imagine that?
No, I couldn't.
I don't even know how you
$700.
Yeah, how can you even fit that into a cart? $700.
It's just fillet. That's the only thing.
Shrimp.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys. I get mad standing in line for 15 minutes, let alone hours.
Hours in the grocery store. Yeah, and just the fact that he's sort of wandering around for hours. I mean, this is definitely, unfortunately, it's just more behavior that indicates pretty significant methamphetamine use or drug use in general.
Yeah. Well, and a clearly altered reality, which is, it seems to be a common theme with all the stories that we're hearing about what they went through that weekend and everything. It's just, outside of reality.
And that I think may play the largest part in both in that gap of the 30 hours and even possibly in what happened to her.
And that could make it extremely hard to actually solve because, we're always looking at things and trying to be very logical, and what's happening there is clearly not.
Right. And it could also mean that not only might we never know, I was going to say this later, but I can say it now because we're talking about this. I would imagine, and I could be giving him too much credit, but I don't think so. I would imagine that with an extended period of sobriety, we may find out what happened. That if his brain was intoxicated at the time, and if he is able to, recall what actually happened, because sometimes they really just never comes back. But if he is able to recall, we may get a better understanding if he ever becomes fully clean and stays clean for several years, because I would imagine that there is a tremendous amount of guilt. He doesn't read as a sociopath to me.
Yeah. And he's a young man. And, people are seemingly trying to give him a fair shake. He's bumping into trouble. We get that. That pattern doesn't seem to stop. And now he's in a very serious place for it. Right. But, there was with the escalation in the use and the addiction, the behaviors that go along with it also escalate. And that's why we see this sort of like October, November, December, there's like all this stuff starting to happen. Yeah. And it's just, it's spinning out of control. That's sort of what, you hear people in 12-step programs talk about rock bottom. And a lot of times what you see right before rock bottom is just this whirlwind of chaos and disaster that finally everything falls apart. And you see that in him with the credit card theft and the grocery store stuff. And then the, one stolen vehicle, another stolen vehicle. I mean, this guy is just losing control rapidly at the end. And Allyson was unfortunately standing there with him. Yeah. We have another one here. Misdemeanor Class A, fraudulent use of a credit card. He's convicted for that as well. Here we've got I don't know if this is part of the same. No, this would be different. It says incarceration duration 6 months, county jail, remand. Credit
was that the Uber one? That was the Uber one, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, it's related to him using someone else's phone to book a ride sharing service.
Right. And if that ride sharing service was attached to their card, which it has to be, Uber, you have to attach to a card, then that's actually what they're able to get the most significant chunk of him out of is the credit card use. That's why.
Now here, this is kind of interesting to me because we know that he stole a vehicle. We've covered that on the previous episodes. Felony Class C, possession of a stolen vehicle, dismissed.
Right. So, and then you will see under that, I believe, the unauthorized use, right? So unauthorized use is as sort of, it's a lower level of vehicle theft. So if I lone morph my car and I say, yeah, you can use it to go to Wegmans and buy $700 worth of groceries and then bring it back to me by tonight, and a week later he has not returned the car, I call the police. The police charge him with unauthorized use because he did at some point have permission to use that vehicle. He expanded beyond the scope of that permission.
Okay.
Now, again, I don't know that he had permission to ever use either of the vehicles that he originally stole, but what might have happened was because it is a lower degree, but in essentially the same block, the same category, which most states require. If you're going to plea down, it has to be in the same category.
Right.
That's probably what they pled it down to.
Gotcha.
And that's why he pled. Yeah.
Would it make any difference if the vehicle had not been called in stolen yet? Because that's something else that we're hearing from the private investigator, is that the guy probably didn't know that his vehicle had been stolen by the time it was found.
Yes. And because of that, he can say something like, oh, I left the keys in it. I thought it was okay for me to use it. I mean, and that's, baloney, of course. That might also be another reason they would go with unauthorized use. But more than likely, it was just that his defense attorney pled it down.
Okay. Gotcha.
You bring up a good point mentioning the defense attorney. It's pretty fair to say that he's got a pretty good team, legal defense, with all these different things he's been charged with, and he's not doing some kind of serious time.
Well, I mean, possibly, or it may be just that he has a good public defender. The stuff that we're seeing with him is actually pretty run of the mill. We're not seeing elaborate, maneuverings and stuff like that would require a dream team to find a way to minimize these charges. Do you know what I mean? I think any good public defender could make all this happen, and because this is the kind of stuff that this stuff just moves through the court system like this. You know what I mean? These would have been, he'd have been in and out of court probably in minutes or hours on all of these.
Right.
Are there more serious things that he probably would have been given harsher sentence for if he had assaulted someone or he's got the kidnapping side and I don't know.
Right. And again, I feel like we talk a lot about, and I think this is one of the things that, as former law enforcement, but also somebody who recognizes that there are significant problems within the criminal justice system, that it is really, really important to recognize the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. And, it's very easy to charge somebody with kidnapping by telling the guy, I have a gun and you can't get out of this car. It is also incumbent upon a good criminal justice system to say, yeah, but the guy got in the car with them. They were using drugs together. And, so maybe it's not really kidnapping. And you see that sort of over and over again in Ben's cases. And I think, I guess overall, that's good. It's a shame that his unraveling, unfortunately, had terrible, terrible consequences for an innocent bystander. Yeah. And that is where we end up then, where we get pushback and say, we have to treat these things seriously, because somebody could get really, really hurt. And so it's a fine line. I would suspect one of the things that I look for, you guys know that I'm a hammer, and one of my two favorite nails, is domestic violence. It's one of the areas that I've studied extensively and researched a lot. And so when I first hear that a woman goes missing and her boyfriend is suspected, I go, aha, and immediately start looking. And other than what looks like that incident with the sister, which there was no indication that there was a physical assault, there are no real indicators of true violence, of the kind of hand-on-hand, like person-to-person contact violence that you would expect to see typically when a woman goes missing or is murdered at the hands of her partner. You know what I mean?
But we also have to acknowledge this guy's young. This criminal record is pretty new. I mean, we're talking a span of 3 or 4 years. And is there a pattern that could potentially escalate? We've got, kidnapping type charges, some type of harassment that happened on Christmas. And there is actually a charge in this cluster, which is felony Class C strangulation. But
I haven't seen that one.
But it's dismissed. And the only information that I could find on it was a person on Twitter named Jeff Kirsch actually reported on it, saying the incidents allegedly occurred October 23rd and January 23rd. To be clear, these strangulation charges were against a different woman, not Watterson, and the charges were dismissed.
Yeah, I mean that again, coming back to hammers and nails, it is the single biggest determining or single biggest predictor of an abuser, particularly a man who will ultimately kill a partner, is history of strangulation. It is, it's far and away, it's a more important red flag than all of the rest put together.
For a charge like that to get dismissed, what would be the likely conditions that happened for that dismissal? The person say, I'm not pressing charges, or...
Perhaps, yeah. In most states, I believe probably in all 50 states, domestic violence is the charges are pressed by the police department rather than by the victim. The victim is classified as a witness, so that they can't be coerced into dropping charges or scared into dropping charges or anything. But if there is a total refusal to cooperate, it is very difficult to press forward. So it may be that the person chose not to cooperate, and so they had no choice but to dismiss. That is alarming, and I had not seen that. The rest of it to me looks like, standing back, this is an escalating addiction problem, right, and everything is attached. And in fact, a lot of their behavior in the last hours, and there's nothing that looks like Allyson was abusing meth. You know what I mean? Like, right. I know that because I looked on Reddit and I looked in these sites too. And there were people who were like, oh, well, maybe she was using with him and stuff. And there's nothing that indicates that, particularly the stretches of time that she wasn't with him. So it wasn't like, oh, she's, using him to get stuff.
We'll continue learning about Ben's past criminal history right after this short break.
Hello, this is Gray Hughes. If you would like to discuss true crime on a nightly basis, please join the Freak family on the Gray Hughes Investigates YouTube channel, where shows typically begin between 6 and 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We discuss cold cases that have had very little coverage, if any, over the years. We also investigate missing persons cases, both cold and active. We also discuss current active cases in the news. We try and put all the facts together in a case, including location information, then develop reasonable theories based on that information. One of the things I am most proud about is that because of the generous Freak family, I'm able to take a large percentage of the YouTube channel revenue and donate to various crime-related charities. So far this year, we've donated $15,500. So come join the Freak family at Gray Hughes Investigates on YouTube and be part of a true crime family making a difference.
Welcome back, and please keep in mind that our sponsors are helping us raise funds that will go towards investigating this case further, so please show them the same support they're showing us.
What I do look at the weird stuff that you guys have discussed in previous episodes, the friends dropping you off here and then somebody dropping you off here and then dropping you off there. This looks like scoring behavior. This is somebody trying to find drugs or find the money they need for drugs. So I do sort of feel like Allyson was getting dragged along while he was trying to get high or was actively getting high, getting money to go score.
Yeah, the social information that we've bumped into, and we've had interviews with some people in her circle of friends and stuff like that. We're in the same boat. We're not getting anything that's very strong that she would have been a methamphetamine user. at all. Actually, it's really
Yeah.
not coming through that way. The only thing
Yeah.
that makes you even wonder about that is hearing about the activity of them kind of running around together. And if he was really in a spot where he was delusional and his view of reality was skewed so hard, why was she going along with it? Why was she?
Well, and that may have been why the one witness said that she looked so strange at the door when they went, and gave her the water and stuff. It may be why. I mean, because she also probably feels some measure of responsibility towards him, right? Like if he's not in his right mind, she's sort of feeling like she needs to take care of him. But it may be that his story of like she walked away she just left in the woods was her being fed up with this, at some point. So, I don't get any sense that she was using. You do get a sense that this was a guy she'd been crushing on since like middle school or something. They had talked about on the Vanished podcast that they had known each other since they were kids, and she'd always really kind of had a crush on him. And that's sort of a powerful drug in and of itself. It's really hard to let that vision of somebody go, and kind of thinking you can help save them.
When I look at the events of the day, it seems like I could see Allyson starting to get really frustrated with what's going on. Probably as they're walking from where they put the truck through the woods, she's using his shoes. They get over to this house. She's just getting really like, what's going on? And then as they leave down that hill, that's when the mail delivery person came by and saw them. And she said that he looked like the devil. And then she's walking, I think it was in front of him. So I could see them walking down, and then there's a coat over at some point down there. I guess we'll talk about that later, but there's a coat down that walk, so you can kind of just see that maybe she was just fed up with the whole thing, and then
she's probably exhausted too. They've been up, apparently, it seems like, for days at this point.
It's crazy. It's just the whole thing is absolutely bizarre, and just the whole trek that they made down the hill there, and then there's phone calls made. I mean, I guess we'll get to that later though in the podcast.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you talked about the history of the friendship, because think back to when you were that age and think about how big your world was. I mean, it's those people, and they're like everything,
Oh yeah. I have a Ben from my middle school, you know what I mean? The one that I crushed on all through middle school and high school and stuff. And, we're still friends on Facebook, and it's always, luckily he's not a meth user. But it's hard to ever let go of that sort of affection that you have for somebody in such a pivotal role. And that to me is probably the biggest reason why she kept, getting sucked back in, was just this desire to bring that to sort of resuscitate those good feelings.
On top of the criminal behaviorist aspect, it's really helpful to have a woman's perspective on this case as well. So you're playing multiple experts here for us.
Well, do you think let me ask you something. Do you think it's, what are the likelihood, even though there was that crush and everything like that there was a moment where she just said, I'm done?
Oh, 100%. That's why I say it's entirely plausible, his version of events. Or now, who knows how he behaved in response. But the story of she just was like, I'm out of here, and walked away from me in the middle of the woods. Absolutely. Absolutely, it's plausible. I mean, at that point, she's had quite a hellish weekend, and it sounds like that was a follow-up to hellish months.
You bring up a good point. How did he react if she did say, this is it, I'm done? Could that have been a moment of a loss of control that resulted in something
It
sinister?
certainly seems like if he was high, there's no accounting for what could have happened. And again, particularly high on meth, it is in a nefarious substance.
And now we know that there was a strangling incident, and so it makes you wonder.
It certainly does.
Private investigator Michael O'Connell had a few statements about the role methamphetamine use might be playing in this case.
Another fly in the ointment, or elephant in the room, however you want to describe it, is the fact that Ben was a known meth addict. And I suppose I could use the qualifier of, in my opinion, but I think it's well documented.
Yeah.
And that messes everything up. The effects that methamphetamine have on these people is just disastrous. It causes extreme paranoia, wild stories. I think that the whole thing that led to the contact with Hillsborough police at the fire station, and the phone call to Ben's mom saying we were just robbed, etc. I don't think they were robbed. I think he was just being paranoid.
Huh.
They get it in their heads that they're being followed. Any car completely innocently driving by, in their minds, is following them. And anyway, it's tough to describe. It is the most destructive drug that there is. I've had murder cases in the past where we had important witnesses that, between their interviews and trial time, they would begin using meth heavily, and they would become, in effect, worthless. And we couldn't even use them as witnesses.
Sarah, can you tell us of an instance where, have you ever had something similar to what the private investigator is talking about there on a case?
Well, the case in Oklahoma, the Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman case, I think part of the reason that there are so many unanswered questions in that case is many of the players, both potential witnesses and potential suspects, were ravaged by meth. I mean, the community has a tremendous amount of it, and all of the key suspects are or were meth addicts at the time and meth makers and dealers at the time. So that introduces a whole nother world of problems. And then a number of the witnesses that were talked to for the affidavit in the case, in the one set of charges that eventually went through, a number of them, had been meth users at the time. So it becomes very difficult to know what they really saw versus what they credibly could have seen or just hallucinated or misremembered. Yeah. I mean, and even just the very, the difficulties that investigators have had with locating the girls' remains was because of so much of the secrecy that was going on in the meth underworld at the time. So, that's one. I remember when I was still an officer, but going through, we go through a lot of continuing ed type training, and we had a class on meth stuff. And one of the investigators that was teaching the class was talking about a case where an otherwise very loving, sweet man butchered his two nieces with an axe because he was babysitting, got high, and thought that they were monsters, like these horrible monsters, and he killed them. And that's, that was the one that I was thinking of, because when he got sober, he pled to everything and just said, because he realized what he had done, and he the whole thing kind of came to him. He was not, a serial killer type of guy. So, I agree. I think of all the substances that we can deal with, either suspects, victims, or witnesses, it is the most likely to throw a wrench in the entire thing.
It's so strange because when you hear about someone talk about an acid trip or something like that, and the way that they describe, there was colors and, cartoons were happening around me and all this kind of stuff, you don't necessarily hear of a destructiveness or almost the kind of level of insanity, even though you're hearing something like that, oh my God, the sun started singing to me.
Right.
With meth, you hear there was one case, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was a couple, and they were calling 911 and saying, hey, this guy's been stealing cars and he's hiding the cars in the trees out here. And we can see that there's 100 cars in the trees. It's such a strangely destructive, the skew on reality is way different.
It opens a door to a much darker world than some other substances, even other hallucinogenic substances, right? Like LSD or THC, people will talk about being like paranoid when they're smoking weed or something, but yeah, you don't typically think that family members are, beasts from Lovecraft country and coming to get you. So, yeah,
do you think it's possible though that he's doing a little combination? I mean, he's got this crazy sort of paranoia, but it seems like he lies at every single chance and almost for no reason, just sort of to get.
Well, that's typical addict behavior. That it becomes second nature to lie in order to forward the ultimate goal of getting the next fix. And that's, I don't say that with judgment. It is an illness. It is classified in the DSM, substance abuse disorder, and it is in need of medical treatment. But all the same, it is wreaking havoc on the people around them. And so the lying usually makes more sense in their head than it does to the people around them. So you say like, oh, he's lying at every turn, sometimes for no reason. There's a reason to him. It might not be clear to us, but and he probably, a lot of meth users, a lot of amphetamine users, right? So people whose drug of choice is uppers will mix and match other types of speed. And so, you know what I mean? Like whatever you can get your hands on, in the same way that you may see an opiate addict will use either heroin or oxy or something, you know what I mean? So it's like whatever you can get your hands on is going to be what they're
like when he's at the fire station, he makes up this story. But it seems like maybe that wasn't this weird paranoia moment. See, that's the thing, is it could just be that he thought, hey, they'll let me use the phone if they think there's some kind of emergency.
100%. I kind of had that same sense. And it was the same thing about the car accident when they went to the house and knocked on the door and said, we had a car accident, because it's the first thing, again, not a criminal mastermind, that comes to his mind of like, oh, I'll get somebody to let me use the phone. That's all I need to do is use the phone. And rather than just saying,
right,
we're lost, because I kept thinking that myself, because a fire department is probably going to let you use the phone regardless. You don't need to concoct a story, but he travels in this world and he traffics in this environment where, that kind of thing seems plausible to him. And so of course they're going to let me use the phone if I tell him I got robbed. But like one of you pointed out in a previous episode, nobody was robbing him. Between the two of them, they only had one pair of shoes. There was nothing to rob. Right. And I actually think it's probably more likely that it was the other way around, that at Charlie's house, either at the party or afterwards when they went back, he tried to get Charlie to give him some money or possibly tried to steal from them. So, it's of course nobody tried to rob him.
In April of 2020, Ben Garland was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. The court also revoked his probation for several of his earlier charges. On top of the 3 years in prison, he will serve another 2 years under supervision, the DA's offices said. A few months into Ben's prison sentence, a terrible discovery would be made. Allyson's body was found. Answering one question, but opening many, many more. We'll get into those details on the next episode. But for everyone here, knowing Allyson is no longer with us and now seeing Ben's criminal past, what do you think? Is this the right guy? Is there something else going on at play here?
Well, I think you could say that he's responsible for what happened to Allyson, just based on, he has her out there. He didn't do what he needed to do to make sure that she was safe. And he lost track of her apparently. And then he didn't do anything anytime soon. I mean, it took 30 hours to get anybody out there. So I think no matter how you look at it, he's responsible, but did he physically do something? We don't know at this point.
Morph?
Yeah, I'm right there with Gray. It seems like it's on him that she's in this situation to begin with, and whatever happened out there, I don't know if it's been determined or can be determined her cause of death, whether it was natural or related to drugs or at the hands of someone. He put her in that position with his actions, and she probably, in normal everyday life, if it wasn't for him, wouldn't be there in that situation.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you guys. I think that by him getting this sentence and then her remains being located shortly afterwards, the investigators now have sort of the luxury of some time to try and really build a case, really see if they can figure out what happened to her. I would speculate that you're going to see some significant pressure placed on Ben's mom, on Molly. I think there are some other holes in her story that leap out at me, and I would bet you dollars to donuts that they leapt out at the investigators in the case as well. So I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on Molly to tell more of what she knows, what happened in that 30 hours. And then they'll be able to leverage Ben with some of that. And again, if he gets clean in prison, which there is no guarantee of, meth especially is pretty common in prison. So if he's able to get clean in prison, he then may become more cooperative, particularly if it was an accidental death or something that, that was not just straight up murder. He may be more willing to be forthright, so that this doesn't just kind of hang over him.
I think it's going to be very hard for him to take the position of it was an accidental death because of all the movement and stuff that happens after it. But to your point, I get trying to buy time before you're bringing the police in, especially if he's trying to come down and all that. But to come out later and say, yeah, but it was really an accident and here's what happened.
Right.
It's going to be tough.
No, it's going to be tough. And I think, like I said, and alluded to in last week's episode, I think there's going to be some legal repercussions for the mom as well. I don't know if you want me to tail off on this. You can always edit this out, but I don't believe the pie guy story for a minute. That was in a way to establish an excuse for their being cited in that area. There was another reason they were in that area, and they came up with the pie guy story as the reason, because that was the only thing they could think of that was out there. I've heard the guy interviewed, and he said there was no indication that they purchased from the table, like the honor system thing that you guys talked about.
Yeah.
And she then after that said, well, no, we went up and knocked on the door and told him we wanted to buy, and he just gave us a pie, and he hit the closest he would come. Yeah. He said he doesn't remember it. He says it has happened, but that he doesn't have any memory of that. And at that point, when they would have been questioning him, it would have been fairly recent. Yeah. So, I think there was something else over in that area. I also don't think mom brought him over to Charlie's. I'm going to get myself sued here. I don't think she brought him over to Charlie's to prove he didn't do it. I think she probably either knew that Charlie had supplied him with drugs, or that Ben maybe tried to rob Charlie. And she went over there to kind of try and settle whatever score was going on. And again, these may all be sort of quasi innocent mistakes made in the immediate aftermath of like, oh my God, what happened and what are we involved in? But it's not going to matter now. They're gonna start picking up these loose ends and tying them together and seeing what the picture looks like.
Well, for me, it's always about the physical evidence. So we've got a lot more information to get into in terms of the state that Allyson's found in, what is found with her. And we are definitely going to be getting to all that in a future episode. Sarah, thank you so much for your time and for looking into this and helping us understand this.
Absolutely. I just, I really appreciate you guys kind of looking at these cases, particularly with missing and murdered women, and shining some light on them. And just for my own CYA, I have to say, obviously, all of this is speculation because we don't have the police reports. We don't really know in depth. But a lot of times after, 22 years, you can step back and you can look at a Monet up close and then step back and you can see what the images probably are. So
thank you, Sarah Cailean, for your time and expertise today. You can follow Sarah on Twitter at Cailean Sarah. That's spelled at CAILEANSARAH.
Thank you.
Michael O'Connell will be giving us his insights and much more details about the case in our in-depth interview with him during our season finale coming up in just a few weeks.
Remember, you can find all the information and links you need for any specific episode together all in one place at www.threemeninamystery.com. That's with the number 3. If you have any tips to call in on Allyson's case, please contact the Washington County Sheriff's Investigation Department at 593-846-2500. If you need to remain anonymous, please call Crime Stoppers of Oregon at 503-823-HELP or 503-823-4357.
If you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, you can send them to us via email at threemeninamystery@threemeninamystery.com. That's with the number 3. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter. Our handle there is @3meninamystery. You can also find us on Facebook.
3 Men in a Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please be sure to rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
How was Allyson's body found? What state is it in, and how does her family handle the news? We'll cover that and more on the next episode. Continue the investigation with us next week. I'm John Lorden.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.